On November 14th, 1887, a photographer walks into a Manchester parlor for a simple portrait. An 8-year-old boy, Alec Cooper, holding his 6-month brother. 10 seconds. One flash of stillness. Something's wrong. Samuel sets the chair, hears the clock tick like a drip, smells chemical fixer on his fingers. Alec tries to smile, but his eyes refuse. Inside his head, don't drop him, don't look down, breathe. Years later, the family calls it the last photo before illness. But the dates don't sit right. 2 days earlier, a burial record appears. Why would a father insist? Make him look peaceful? In 2019, a restorer magnifies the image until grain becomes evidence. The baby's fingertips darken, lips tint cold, posture collapses. If Alec knew, what else did everyone in that room agree not to say? If you want the full investigation, records, money, the staged piece, and what the pixels finally confess, subscribe and stay close. Don't binge this. Let it press on you. The mantle frame enters records first, oak darkened by smoke, holding the Cooper portrait above a cold fireplace, placed too early for mourning, too deliberate for decoration, according to probate notes and unsettled neighbors watching. Alec remembers his father lifting the frame with shaking pride, jaw locked, eyes wet yet commanding calm, as if the wood could discipline grief, as if walls listened, time paused, and breath waited permission. Neighbors swear the house felt normal that week, soup simmering, boots lined by doors, yet the mantle stayed bare except that frame, a celebration pretending restraint during nights everyone silently counted. The placement triggers consequences later. Insurance adjusted, curtains drawn earlier, visitors rerouted, because the frame announces finality before permission, before anyone dares breathe wrong inside a house watching itself closely. Dust collects along the mantle lip, gritty, coal sour, scratching throats when moved, while the frame leaves a pale rectangle, a ghost of intention burned into varnish that refuses erasure. Why choose that height, that angle, that day, unless the frame was meant to instruct visitors where not to look, what not to ask, and who would obey without being told? Ledger entries list the frame purchased months earlier, oversized glass, heavier backing, suggesting anticipation, not impulse, a preparation humming beneath the portrait like wiring hidden behind plaster walls. Alec feels accused by that knowledge, stomach tight, hearing his father rehearse steadiness, thinking, he planned this, then hating himself for the thought in a room breathing coal smoke. The frame promises order, yet delivers unease. It centers the room while pushing everyone sideways, a geometry of denial that feels tidy and cruel simultaneously under the ticking clock. By winter, the mantle becomes an anchor. Conversations orbit it, pauses lengthen, footsteps soften, because the frame silently penalizes noise, laughter, any future tense spoken aloud. A thin crack creeps through varnish near the corner, catching lamplight, whispering when cooled nights contract wood, a sound like breath held too long by anxious rooms counting seconds. If objects remember intentions, what does this frame recall at night? When the house exhales, when no one watches the portrait keep its promise without witnesses present or mercy offered. The mantle's height matches mourning custom, but records show no declared death then, a discrepancy stiffening investigators later, like a knot tightening after being ignored weeks inside ledgers. Alec notices visitors touching the frame edge unconsciously, thumbs smudging glass, pulling back, embarrassed, as if caught checking a pulse they feared absent during forced polite conversation. Official calm reigns, yet the mantle commands vigilance. Smiles arrive late, leave early, because the frame seems to watch back, measuring sincerity against breath in men passing daily. This vigilance shapes decisions, lights dimmed, meals shortened, voices trained downward, until the house performs restraint perfectly, rehearsed nightly under the frame's quiet authority. Coal smoke leaves a bitter sweetness, clinging to fabric, making the frame smell older than it is, history accelerated by heat, waiting, and hands not touching despite temptation. What instruction does a room absorb when silence is curated, when a frame teaches restraint, and who benefits when grief is arranged like furniture for public consumption? Later examination finds nail holes misaligned, proof the frame moved before settling, a rehearsal of placement suggesting debate, hesitation, and a final decision hardened without recorded dissent. Alec feels relief and dread together, realizing the frame wasn't inevitable. Hearing an inner voice whisper, they argued, then wondering what argument sounds like without words between men. Movement implies choice, yet choice dissolves under ritual. Once fixed, the frame pretends destiny, erasing fingerprints, smoothing doubt into respectable stillness for everyone entering later. Respectable stillness breeds compliance. Questions thin, memories edit themselves, and the mantle graduates from object to rule, enforced gently by habit rather than command. When fires die, ash settles on the mantle edge, soft as snowfall, muffling sound, leaving the frame haloed, a shrine accidentally built by physics rather than belief. If physics builds shrines, what dismantles them? And how long before a frame's authority collapses under curiosity, evidence, or one honest question asked alone? Municipal photographs later show the mantle unchanged, same height, same angle, anchoring timelines, making the frame constant while bodies, dates, and stories shift relentlessly. That constancy unnerves Alec, a comfort feeling like surveillance, sensing the frame outlasts moods, outlasts arguments, maybe outlasts truth inside the walls. A monument to steadiness becomes witness to decay. Steadiness requires maintenance, denial requires effort, and the frame demands both without acknowledging cost paid by living men. Costs surface subtly. Insomnia, shorter tempers, rituals hardening, as the mantle's rule trains everyone to perform okayness, rewarding silence with temporary peace. Late evenings, the house clicks and sighs, and the frame answers with a faint tick, wood contracting, a dialogue nobody admits hearing while counting breaths carefully. If a frame can teach silence, can silence hide preparation? And when investigators return, what will this mantle confess once its authority is finally challenged? The shutter's mechanics matter because 10 seconds is too long for comfort, too short for ceremony, a suspended breath where nothing moves, yet everything decides whether to stay hidden or surface forever. Samuel the photographer checks the tripod twice, fingers tacky with chemicals, hearing his own pulse, thinking, don't rush this, while the room smells of coal and starch, ordinary details misbehaving under pressure. 10 seconds promises clarity, yet doubt creeps in. Portraits lie politely, and Samuel knows stillness can be staged, that obedience to instructions sometimes hides the most important movement just outside sight. When the shutter opens, consequences begin counting. Eyes strain, muscles burn, balance shifts, and any truth failing to hold its pose risks leaking through posture, grip, or a tremor nobody names aloud. The clock's tick grows loud, metallic, scraping nerves. Alec feels the chair edge biting his thigh, the baby's weight heavier than expected, a warmth cooling too quickly against his forearm. Why choose 10 seconds unless the photographer expects resistance, expects life to fight being fixed, and believes time itself will pressure secrets into revealing themselves under glass? Records show Samuel upgraded equipment weeks earlier, a slower plate, sharper lens, suggesting intention, not routine, an acceptance that this image would demand patience and extract something costly. Alec's mind splits, pride and fear colliding. He wants to prove steadiness, yet a whisper insists something is wrong, that steadiness itself feels rehearsed, borrowed, and brittle in his hands. The shutter enforces discipline. Blink and you lose control. Breathe too deeply and shoulders betray you. A system rewarding restraint while punishing honest reflex with permanent exposure. After 5 seconds, arms ache. After 7, sweat beads. After 9, Alec hears his father's breath change, a tiny hitch, a sound louder than the clock, then swallowed instantly. Light from the window feels colder, flatter, as if drained of kindness, coating skin in a pallor Samuel notices but doesn't question, because questioning mid-exposure risks ruining everything. If light records what words avoid, what does it capture when everyone agrees to remain still, and who benefits from the illusion that compliance equals peace? The shutter closes with a dull clap, anticlimactic, almost rude, ending a tension nobody acknowledges, leaving behind a silence heavier than before, like a held note dropped without warning. Immediately, movement returns too fast. Chairs scrape, breaths release, hands adjust, a collective exhale that feels guilty, as if relief itself might be evidence someone was pretending moments earlier. Samuel notes posture changes, scribbles nothing, yet the image already nags him, a sense the plate holds more than requested, a surplus truth riding alongside the commission. 10 seconds later, consequences ripple. The father thanks him too formally, eyes fixed elsewhere, as if gratitude might bind the moment, keep it contained, prevent questions forming afterward. Alec avoids looking at the baby's face, focusing instead on the shutter, thinking, it's done, repeating relief like a spell that doesn't quite work. The shutter becomes a boundary. Before it, uncertainty breathes. After it, narrative hardens, because photographs argue with memories and usually win when time blurs edges. Samuel washes the plate, watching shadows emerge, noticing tones darker than expected, fingers pausing, heart nudging him toward concern he buries under professional habit. What responsibility does a shutter carry when it freezes not just bodies, but decisions, and can a mechanism be complicit without intention or malice? Later, investigators fixate on exposure length, noting 10 seconds exceeds custom for children, implying the photographer anticipated difficulty or the subject required extra control. Alec, older now, remembers the burn in his arms more than faces, an ache returning when he thinks about holding still for something that didn't feel alive enough. Control masquerades as care. The shutter rewards those who suppress instinct, teaching everyone present that discomfort is acceptable if the result appears orderly. Order, once achieved, deflects scrutiny. The finished image looks calm, balanced, convincing, encouraging viewers to trust composition over sensation, stillness over suspicion. Chemical fumes sting Samuel's nose as the image dries, a sharp reminder that preservation requires harsh processes, baths that strip and fix simultaneously. If preservation hurts, what does it cost the preserved? And who decides that the pain was necessary, justified, or invisible to future eyes? The shutter's click echoes years later in testimony, a sound recalled differently by each man, softer or louder depending on what they need to forget. Evidence suggests the shutter did its job too well, sealing a moment so completely that doubt had to work harder, dig deeper, learn patience. Patience becomes the investigation's lesson. 10 seconds created decades of certainty, and undoing that certainty requires longer exposure to truth than anyone prefers. When magnified, the image resists at first, but the shutter's discipline cracks under scrutiny, revealing micro-movements, subtle collapses, proof that stillness was never absolute. If 10 seconds could trap a lie inside order, how many seconds will it take to let that order fail? And who will be ready when the shutter opens again? The magnification grid arrives decades later, thin black lines overlaying the image, dividing calm into squares, turning memory into terrain, each box demanding inspection, patience, and the courage to look closer. The restorer leans forward, breath shallow, noticing how normal textures feel wrong when enlarged, like skin turning unfamiliar, grains sharpening into questions that won't stay polite or distant anymore. Magnification promises clarity, yet introduces doubt. The closer the image gets, the less it behaves, as if truth resists being cornered and prefers distance to maintain its disguise. Consequences begin immediately. What once read as peace fractures into inconsistencies, angles collapsing, weight distribution failing, small betrayals of physics that refuse to align with the story everyone learned. Under the grid, fingertips darken unnaturally, edges softening where tension should exist, a detail quiet yet deafening, triggering a cold recognition that something in those seconds was already slipping away. Why does enlargement feel accusatory? As if the image resents scrutiny, punishing the viewer with unease for daring to ask what calm required in that room. The grid reveals asymmetry in Alec's grip, pressure uneven, muscles compensating, a boy performing steadiness while instinct screams imbalance he cannot correct without breaking the pose. Inside his memory, Alec hears the clock again, feels the burn, realizes the photograph captured endurance, not serenity, a distinction the grid makes impossible to ignore once seen. The grid's order contrasts chaos. Lines are clean, merciless, refusing sentiment, reducing excuses to measurable deviations that don't care about intention or narrative comfort. Each square becomes a witness. Posture here, shadow there. A sequence of minor failures adding up to a conclusion nobody wants yet nobody can refute. Sound returns in fragments as the image grows. The shutters clap, a breath hitch, wood creaking, memories surfacing because the grid demands recollection alongside observation. If memory bends to survive, what happens when an image refuses to bend back, insisting on its version through pixels and lines? Investigators mark anomalies, cataloging darkness at lips, slackness at neck, noting how gravity appears victorious despite instruction, a quiet overthrow happening within enforced stillness. Alec watches this analysis feeling exposed, pride bruised, realizing his obedience preserved something terrible, that following orders sometimes means carrying proof you never wanted. The grid does not accuse loudly. It waits, letting the viewer arrive alone at discomfort, a slow walk toward recognition rather than a sudden shove. Contrast deepens, revealing tonal collapse inconsistent with life, a scientific phrasing masking the emotional blow that lands when possibility becomes probability. Why did no one see this before? Or did they see and choose distance, trusting the small size of the original to keep doubt manageable? Enlargement changes responsibility. Ignorance becomes harder to claim when evidence grows teeth, when clarity demands response rather than interpretation. The grid hums on screen, lines steady, impartial, like a judge that doesn't speak yet shapes verdicts through exposure alone. Alec feels two emotions clash, relief that truth exists, and shame that it waited so long, trapped by loyalty and fear of consequence. The grid also shows the father's hands just outside frame, tension implied by shadows, a presence influencing outcome without appearing, authority felt rather than seen. If absence can exert force, how many decisions hide in margins, shaping events while avoiding documentation? Pixels break down further, revealing micro-movements. Tiny collapses the shutter disciplined but couldn't erase, proof that control has limits even when rehearsed. The restorer pauses often, sensing the weight of revelation, knowing each zoom deepens implication, expanding responsibility backward through time. Documentation follows, reports cautious yet firm, language sterile, because truth often arrives wrapped in restraint to survive institutional corridors. Alec reads those words feeling older, smaller, recognizing how official tone cannot soften personal reckoning triggered by confirmation. The grid becomes a symbol of insistence, teaching that looking closer is an ethical act, uncomfortable but necessary when surface calm feels too perfect. Perfect calm now reads as warning, a sign something resisted being seen, something requiring compression to appear acceptable. As the image fills the screen, doubt finally exhausts itself, replaced by a quieter certainty that doesn't shout, but settles heavy and permanent. If magnification dismantles illusion, what happens next when the grid is removed and everyone must face the unfiltered image alone? The unmarked stone waits at the edge of the cemetery, low, undecorated, easy to miss. A refusal of narrative carved through absence, as if someone believed names invite questions better left dormant. Investigators find it by accident, boots crunching frost, noticing disturbed earth where records suggest ceremony. Yet the ground offers no dates, no inscription, only weight pressing downward. Alex stands there years later, breath visible, feeling respect and anger collide, because anonymity can be mercy or erasure depending on who requested it and who must live with it. The stone's placement contradicts maps, slightly off alignment, suggesting haste or secrecy, a quiet deviation that echoes earlier misalignments no one addressed when addressing them might have cost stability. Cold air smells of iron and wet soil, sensory proof that the past isn't abstract, that decisions sink into ground, lingering long after voices stop defending them. Why choose an unmarked stone unless permanence felt dangerous, unless memory itself required containment rather than acknowledgement? Municipal ledgers list expenses routed indirectly, a paper trail designed to blur intention, enough to function, not enough to explain, a pattern investigators recognize with grim familiarity. Alec reads those entries feeling protective and betrayed, understanding fear yet resenting its reach, realizing concealment always recruits the innocent eventually. The stone promises rest, yet delivers tension. Standing near it feels like interrupting something unfinished, A conversation paused mid-sentence and never resumed. Local caretakers recall instructions spoken softly, delivered without eye contact, a request to keep things simple, undisturbed, a tone that discouraged curiosity politely. Simplicity becomes strategy. Without a name, the stone avoids storytelling, allowing assumptions to harden unchallenged while truth stays underground. If no one speaks a name aloud, does responsibility dissolve, or does it concentrate in those who remember silently? Weather erodes edges slowly, rounding corners, making the stone seem older than it is, time accelerated again by intention rather than years. Alec notices this erosion with conflicted relief, sensing nature undoing what was carefully minimized, exposing how fragile control becomes once released. The unmarked stone contrasts the framed portrait. One demands attention, the other deflects it. A symmetry revealing how truth was managed differently depending on audience. Investigators connect this choice to earlier behavior, seeing a consistent pattern: visibility where reassurance was needed, invisibility where risk increased. Standing there, Alec feels loyalty tug against conscience, an internal argument with no witnesses, replaying decisions he didn't make but inherited. The stone absorbs sound, footsteps dull, voices swallowed, creating a quiet heavier than the mantle's silence ever was. What does silence mean here, at the endpoint, when performance ends and only outcome remains? Documents confirm no ceremony attended beyond immediate men, no announcements, no follow-up, a burial that completed containment rather than closure. Alec imagines the day, whether similar, hands cold, wondering if anyone hesitated or if efficiency felt like kindness in that moment. Kindness and avoidance blur easily. The stone embodies both, a mercy that denies dialogue, a solution that postpones reckoning. Investigators photograph the site carefully, aware that absence itself is evidence, a choice that speaks through restraint. The unmarked stone becomes the final symbol, linking preparation, control, magnification, and silence into a single physical conclusion. Alec rests his palm briefly on cold granite, feeling weight without inscription, an ending that refuses explanation yet demands acknowledgement. He steps back conflicted, grateful truth surfaced, resentful it required disturbance, knowing peace often depends on what remains hidden. The stone stays quiet, but the investigation doesn't, because silence loses authority once patterns align and patience outlasts fear. Records close, conclusions settle, yet the unmarked stone remains unresolved, a reminder that some answers arrive without comfort. If control shaped every stage, what happens now that control dissolves? And who carries the cost when truth finally stands unframed, unburied, and spoken?